It's almost 5 minutes past 4 in Radio Cairo. This is World of Info. We're coming live from Radio Cairo, Studio 3, and my name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk. Manal Zakaria is at the control, and our direct line number is 25789407. And today is our appointment with the World of Info, and we have a very special guest who is kind enough to come in our program again, and he's so kind. His Excellency Ambassador Dumas, Ambassador of Canada in Cairo. Thank you very much, sir, for coming. It's really a great pleasure and honor that you have come again to our program.
You're so kind. It's always a pleasure to come in and see you, Dr. Mabrouk, but also to talk to the listeners of Radio Cairo.
Really, it's a great pleasure and honor. Ambassador Louis Dumas is a very experienced diplomat, a very seasoned diplomat, if we use the expression. He has a degree, an undergraduate degree in translation from Laval, a master degree in management from Boston University, and a master degree in ethics from Oxford University, and he has a lot of very distinguished class fellows and alumni, and we'll talk about that later, but not on air, maybe off air, but definitely he has served his country in very important posts, whether that was in Moscow, Cairo in his early years, and then Tel Aviv, Singapore, Peking, and now as an ambassador in Cairo, with great experience in his resume, and definitely sharing with us his wisdom and experience. Really is very kind of you, sir, to come in our program.
No, it's a real pleasure. Wisdom, I'm not sure, to be honest with you, but I'll do my very best.
No, I'm sure. I mean, His Excellency is very modest, and you can understand that from the way that he is talking today, but definitely he has a lot of things to share with us today, because Canada, which is a country in the northern part of North America, its 10 provinces and 3 territories extend from the Atlantic to the Pacific and northward into the Arctic Oceans, covering 9.98 million square kilometers. That is almost 3.85 million square miles, making it the world's second largest country by total area, yet the estimated population is approaching just 37.8 millions.
That's correct.
Is it the weather, geography, or the politics? And there is a famous saying about Canadians that they are just living in the 100 miles north of the borders and north of the United States of America, your big neighbor. So, is it geography or weather or both?
I think it's a bit of everything. You're absolutely correct. I mean, the majority of Canadians live approximately 150 kilometers north of the border with the United States. So if you look at our major cities, Vancouver to the west, Toronto into Montreal to the center, they're actually very close to the U.S. border. But I think it's a question of as you point out, weather. It's a harsh environment, especially in winter. In winter, the temperature can go down to minus 30. If you take into account the wind chill factor, it can go down to minus 50. So you have to be ready for very harsh weather conditions.
How people could survive in this weather? I mean, I'm talking about the 19th century and the 18th century and the centuries before central heating and before the advance in technology. How was that possible for people to, or it was natural selection? Only the tough survived.
Yeah, but you're absolutely correct. It was very tough living. It was surviving the cold was a major undertaking. But I have to say as well, you have to realize that in the old days, as you point out in the, let's say, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, there is the food as well was very important. So you had to plan in the summer and the fall to have enough food to survive the winter, one. And second, you had to make sure you ate a variety of foods that would allow you to have the proper vitamins, the proper nutriments to be able to survive. So big shout out at this point, to the indigenous people of Canada who have taught the European settlers how to survive the winter. For example, when the European settlers arrived, a lot of them were dying of scurvy, which is a lack of vitamin C. And then the indigenous people of Canada showed them how to get vitamin C in the month of winter. So you actually have to make a tea out of a bark of a tree. And then that's how you get your vitamin C. You drink the tea, and that's how you manage to keep scurvy away and survive through the winter.
But in minus 50, people could not go out. I mean, we're talking about the 19th and 18th century. So the people used to stay at home, trying to arrange for something against the cold. How did they really survive?
They with great difficulty. You know, your house had to be really well insulated. But again, you know, we've learned from the techniques of the indigenous people of Canada. You can imagine people living in the Arctic of Canada. The Inuit people, for example, they managed to survive winter by building igloos, by using snow as a way to insulate, you know, their dwellings. So we've learned a lot, you know, from the indigenous people. But you're absolutely correct. A lot of evenings were spent by the fire, telling stories.
But there's nothing music to tell, you know, because
that's right.
For 3 months you'd run out of stories, right?
You gotta be. So that's why Canadians are pretty good storytellers.
Really, that's really very interesting. So if we skip weather and geography, then we have to talk about politics.
Yes.
I mean, of course, Canada is like United States, like Australia, and like the whole of the Americas, is a country, are countries or continents of immigration.
Yes.
Up till now, you are opening your borders for immigrants from all over the world.
Yes.
And Canada is known for being very hospitable, and there is an index of indiscrimination. Canada has a very high score in the indiscrimination. It allows people to have their own culture, their own background, and no much attrition to this motto of being different.
Yep.
So how are you open to immigration, and how come that your population is 37.8? Because your southern neighbor is, of course, approaching almost 300 millions. That is 10 times your population.
Yeah, very good question. I think if you go back in history, let's say the 1800s, the Americans had a very open immigration procedure. Pretty much everyone who wanted to go to America was welcome to come to America. And as you pointed out, Dr. Mabrouk, I think weather and geography played a big role in the attraction of immigrants to North America. So a lot of people preferred to go to the United States because of I would say a climate that was less harsh, and therefore the people, you know, tend to avoid, you know, the colder climates of Canada. But all this to say, I mean, if you look per capita, Canada at the moment is accepting approximately 500,000 new arrivals per year, new permanent residents per year. This is more than 1% of our current population. And definitely, I mean, throughout the years, in our current immigration reality, we've been welcoming to all nations. If you look at the Chinese people coming to Canada, they've been coming to Canada for the past 250 years. Indian people from India as well. It's a big population in Canada, have been coming in great numbers to Canada. Egyptians have been an amazing contributing community to Canada. At the moment, we have more than 300,000 Egyptian Canadians in Canada. They're doing extremely well. They're extremely vibrant in the communities and in society in Canada. And I think that's what makes Canada special. It's a collection of variety of individuals coming from all over the world, coming to live in peace and trying to, do pretty much simple things like educating their people, their families, providing a roof over their heads, making sure that, the people coming to Canada or the people in Canada are healthy, and people contributing to society, which really believes in respect. And I think that's what you get in Canada at the moment.
Perhaps since we brought up the subject of education, the education makes Canada one of the best countries in the world as regards the quality of life.
Yeah.
How was it possible to solve the problem of education? I'm sorry, we're always comparing between your southern neighbor, because the United States of America is very famous for the best education universities and the best education institutes. but yet a lot of it, especially in the universities, is offering the state-of-art education, but with very expensive prices.
Yes.
That even President Biden in the recent years and President Obama were trying as much as possible to reduce the debt of students who are, when they graduate from a university, they are in debt for maybe 20 or 30 years, trying to pay the debt of their high education university. Canada was able to solve this problem. I know that the Canadians, by their being citizens, are paying less tuition fees than their counterparts who are non-Canadians or coming to get education in state-of-art universities like McGill and other universities. They are paying maybe 3 or 4 times the Canadians. So how were you able to support the education of the university education for your citizens with very reasonable pricing, while your southern neighbor was not able to do that?
No, thank you for your question. I think you're looking at different constructions of society. I think in Canada, people will always say, taxes are high in Canada. Yes, we recognize that taxes are high. However, taxes are oftentimes used to subsidize health services, education, and therefore, through the taxes we pay to the provincial level, because education is a provincial matter in Canada. So through the taxes we pay to the provincial, at the provincial level, we manage to subsidize our universities. And it's true. I mean, you can, a foreign student, let's say studying at University of Toronto, might have to pay, I would say, 35,000 Canadian dollars per year, which is quite reasonable in comparison to what's, people have to pay in the United States. At the same time, we have to recognize the excellence of the institution in the United States. They're more privately funded. They have access to large sum of money.
Of course.
I've benefited from an American education, having graduated from Boston University. But at the same time, I would say that Canada offers a good alternative. If you look at the quality of education for the price you pay, it's pretty darn good what you get in Canada. You mentioned McGill, but there's a number of other great universities in Canada.
But you mentioned that the foreign student will pay $35,000. In comparison to the Canadian student, how much would he pay in the same university?
If the Canadian student comes from the same province as the institution, let's say you take an Ontario resident going to the University of Ontario or McMaster University in Hamilton, they will pay, I'm going from memory here, but maybe $8,000.
Oh, that's 1/7 almost, or 1/5, fifth almost of the of the price that a non-Canadian would pay.
And if you're coming from outside the province, it will be higher, but still at $35,000 Canadian dollars, mind you. For a year, it's for the quality of education you get, it's very reasonable. If I may, Dr. Mabrouk, I just want to add as well that we have quite a unique program in Canada, so that's quite appealing for foreign students. So when foreign students come to Canada, they can study in Canada, they get their diplomas in Canada, and then they can work in Canada for 2 years. And if they're successful in working in Canada for 2 years, they can ask for permanent residence in Canada after 2 years. And then after 3 years of permanent residence in Canada, you can ask for Canadian citizenship.
That's a very good policy of brain drain, right?
Yes, some would call it brain drain. I agree with you.
It's mutual. I mean, these people are really want to live in a better place, and and Canada is using this properly, because they're giving them hope and giving them a non-racial discrimination, which is very, very important. I really admire that, because some countries would allow in immigrants, but will not allow them to have a fair chance, if we use the expression. So the fair chance is very, very important, right?
Yeah. And I think your point is right, in the sense that people might call it a brain drain, but the way we see it is providing people an opportunity, options, making decisions for themselves. And I'm happy to see a number of individuals who have benefited from this program have actually come back to their country of origin, be it China, India, the Philippines, or here Egypt.
Yes, we have a lot of, in the 70s and the 60s, and even in the 80s, a lot of Egyptian universities were making use of the bilateral sort of research funding between Canada and the United States, and Canada, since it was offering prices lesser than its counterpart in other Western worlds, has sent a lot of our students in postgraduate studies, and a lot of them have chosen to come back to their country and paying back their debt for the country, for Egypt, and others decided to stay. But the ones who came to Egypt kept the link with Canada and in the research work which went on, and this gives an idea that carrying the heart of the experience, carrying the experience in the heart of these graduates, have really led them to continue the cooperation even when they went back to their hometowns. Right?
Very well said. And in this day and age, and today in 2023, international travel is so easy.
Yes.
At the moment, we have connections between direct non-stop flights between Canada in Egypt. We have flights with Egyptair from Cairo to Toronto. We have flights with Air Canada from Cairo to Montreal, non-stop. It opens up, the possibilities, and nothing makes me happier than seeing, an Egyptian here in Egypt with Canadian citizenship or without Canadian citizenship, has been educated in Canada, who understand the dynamics of the two countries. And to me, I always call these individuals the true ambassadors of Canada to Egypt.
And I brought up the subject of education before the healthcare, because the healthcare in Canada, which is very sophisticated and giving very proper, good care of the whole citizens, but they have the same problem like the UK, which UK also presents a good national health service, is the waiting list.
Yes.
And the waiting list of the health can be, especially in non-chronic or non-acute cases, can be long. For example, if you're asking for a hernia repair, might take you 6 to 8 months until you reach your surgeon. So this is a problem of the complete coverage, which is okay, but that's why I really admire the education idea, because the education gives a real prompt service. The health gives the prompt service for the emergencies, and because of the lack of sometimes of the funds, they cannot over expand and make the waiting list shorter. Is there a possibility to reduce this waiting list? Because a lot of, I'll tell you the experience from my side as a physician, that a lot of physicians would like, for example, to travel to Canada and work there, and yet there is a very sophisticated program of integration of physicians, which is more difficult than the integration of engineers or architects or teachers or accountants. So that makes them not easily integrated and not easily given the chance to have a post in Canada. And if you allow more integration, then the waiting lists will reduce. Like we've discussed that before.
Yes.
So why didn't you solve this problem up till now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think you're reading the Canadian newspaper. I think it's a debate currently in Canada. You're absolutely correct. If you're in a state of emergency, if you have you need to have immediate medical attention. There's service,
nothing better than that.
The service will be second to none. However, if you have like a sprained ankle, you cut your finger and it's no longer bleeding, you need stitches, it might take a while. And I think people are in Canada, and health services is also a provincial responsibility. In the different provinces, we're having this reflection and say, okay, how can we do better? And people are really, really trying hard. And I see, for example, in my own province, in the province of Quebec, there is a current debate about how can we structure ourselves to be more efficient. How can we use the principles of lean management to address, the pressures coming to the hospitals and the clinics. And I think it's going to be very important we think about that, because our population is getting older.
Yes.
And more people will show up at the hospitals, more people will show up at the clinic.
For chronic ailment that will put them into the row or the file of waiting list.
Exactly. And also I think the point that you mentioned is also critical. A physician coming from overseas into Canada, why is it so difficult to get certification, to be able to work in Canada, to practice in Canada. And I think as well we need to have a reflection, have a debate on this issue.
This is very important because some of my students who went to Canada and came back frustrated, or they changed their direction. So Canada lost physicians who went to the UK or to Ireland or to the United States. They crossed the borders even to the United States and are fully integrated as physicians over there.
Yes.
While some of them had to work for sometimes as cab drivers. With all due respect, of course, to cab drivers, but to have a physician working as a cab driver is not a point of interest. And some of my friends, a friend of mine who was a cardiologist, immigrated to Canada, and he was not able to, and he was a professor of cardiology here, and he couldn't work as a cardiologist there. So he went on white collar jobs, but not fitting his expertise or experience. So Canada is losing somebody who's expert, and he could be given the chance even to work in remote areas, because sometimes you are not having physicians to serve in remote areas.
Exactly. You're absolutely correct. I mean, you're reading the landscape extremely well, and we call it in lean management the concept of person job fit. So you have people with good education, good credentials. Could they do the job? Possibly yes. I think we need to have the debate. Where do we want to go with certification of physicians? Because,
for example, UK has solved this problem. In my early times when I graduated, the UK was closing its doors against foreign graduate physicians, and now it's opening the way around after the Brexit, and accepting more physicians and trying to make them more glamorous careers than other countries that have the same problem of the long list, right?
What I retained from your comment, Dr. Mabrouk, is that you were thinking about the UK and not thinking about Canada.
No, I was
which breaks my heart.
Well, that's very kind of you. Well, actually, I never thought of immigration. I always wanted to stay in Egypt, and I think it was.
We're lucky to have you.
It was not a wrong decision. My father was a plastic surgeon. I went also in plastic surgery, so I never complained of not going abroad. But I'm talking about my students, which I see and reflect with my students, younger colleagues, and people how they fared. People who didn't have the chance like me to. I had the chance to be a professor in universities. Others didn't have the chance, so they've taken up the decision of going abroad.
Yes.
And I believe a country that is so hospitable to all the immigrants and kind enough in them and giving a national health service really can make use of these people instead of sending them on the borders to a system which is there is no NHS in the United States. One of my real nice students, he told me, I don't want to go to work in the States as a physician because there is no NHS there. So sometimes people will be denied the proper service. I don't want to be a part of it. I mean, some people think that with strong ethics, since you have a degree in ethics. So this is how it goes.
Anyway, you're absolutely correct. Your point is very valid, and thank you for raising it.
So since we've talked about medicine and we talked about education, we have to go to another important subject, which is sports. But this will be after the break. Okay. So you're still listening to the World of Info, and we're coming live from Studio 3 with His Excellency Ambassador Louis Dumas, the Ambassador of Canada in Cairo, and we are exchanging food for thought, right?
Yes.
So there are two topics that we're going to discuss. We were going to discuss sports in Canada, but before sports in Canada, you asked in particular to listen in our program to the Beatles.
Yes.
I love the Beatles. I'm a big fan, and I'm not the only one. I think maybe there are about 1 billion of us, at least,
if not more.
If not more, yes.
No, I love the Beatles. I've always listened to the Beatles pretty much all my life. So
really,
I always say that the Beatles are the soundtrack of my life.
Well, actually, they are really lovely, and the death of John Lennon has really made a big scar in the hearts of generations, not just the generation that was living there, not just the baby boomers who were living in 1981, but also the people after that, or even our generation, I'm speaking about both of us, who were in their teens in the 80s, yet it scarred them. It scarred like hell. That somebody who's so peaceful like that dies just because he didn't show interest in one of his admirers. So what makes the Beatles very special to you besides that?
I think, if there's so many different ways of looking at it, but I would say the progression of the Beatles between 64 and 67, for example, but I would describe it as curiosity. The fact that they were curious, they were, yes, excellent musicians, but they were curious in other types of forms of art, and they really expanded their exposure to different ways of seeing the world, of appreciating art, very connected to what was happening in society. I think it's just remarkable what they've done in the 3 years, from She Loves You to Sgt. Pepper.
And do you think that, since we're talking about the Beatles, John Lennon and McCartney are in a different category than the other two, Ringo and George?
Well, they were the songwriters.
Yes.
And I think Ringo would recognize that.
Yeah.
And George Martin, who was the Beatles producer, music producer, always said that one of his greatest disappointments, being with the Beatles, is that he did not push George Harrison to write more. And
George has a couple of songs that are really very
remarkable, especially at the end of the Beatles.
Yes, yes. And Ringo was always sticking to the drums, and his drums are being glorified in the Metropolitan Museum, as you know.
Sure.
Of course, you've been there, right? I always remember that. Go there and it's written on it. This is the drums of Ringo Starr.
Yeah, and I have a lot of sympathy for saying Ringo Starr, because he's left-handed, and he played on right-handed drums.
Yes.
So he was always a little off, and they say, that contributed to the sound of the Beatles. So I have a lot of time for this 83-year-old man now who's still very active, still very engaged. So
Definitely. And Paul McCartney, of course, or Sir Paul, is definitely out of this world.
And he's going on tour in a few months.
Yes.
So at the age of, think of 81 or 82. So.
And the concert that they made as a tribute to George, it was maybe less than 10 years ago. This was a tribute to George Harrison.
Yeah.
That was really nice.
Pretty amazing group of people.
Yes. So when we talk about Beatles, we have to do a lot of nostalgic mood, and since we're in a nostalgic mood, we talk about sports, because sports, people who practice sports is part, and of course people who watch sports are somebody else, but definitely sports forms a very important part of our life today, tomorrow, and yesterday. So what makes the sports of interest? I mean, in the United States, you have the football, or the American football,
Yes.
and you have, of course, the basketball that keeps the people totally absorbed, and of course the baseball. These three are by far the most popular in the United States. But Canada has another opinion, right?
Well, we love the three sports that you have mentioned, and I just want to say for the record that basketball was actually invented by a Canadian, a fellow by the name of James Naismith, who came from a small town called Almont, close to Ottawa. And he was teaching in the United States, and created a sport to keep his students active. And so we're very proud of the fact that he's the inventor of basketball as a Canadian. But in Canada, I think the number one sport that people think about is ice hockey.
Yes.
Ice hockey, I have to say, is a religion. People take it very, very seriously.
Yes.
It's a bit like Al Ahly and Zamalek here in Egypt. So you have to pick your team and stick with your team. And but ice hockey is an interesting sport.
For better and for worse.
For better and for worse, let me tell you. So, but ice hockey is an interesting sport because it originates from rugby. So people were trying to find a way to play something similar to rugby in wintertime. And the first game was played in the late 1800s in Montreal. And people had skates, put on skates, and decided to take sticks and a ball and play some type of game. And from there evolved the game of ice hockey as we know today.
But hockey was there before that?
Ice hockey was essentially...
the hockey, the normal grass hockey.
The grass hockey, I'm not sure how it, how the two, got to be created.
Because definitely, hockey, for example, the team of Pakistan and India,
yes,
it's a very popular game there.
Extremely popular.
My uncle, when he was in the military academy, was one of the champions of this grass hockey. This was maybe in the 40s and the 20th century, the late 40s or the early 50s. So, grass hockey, or they call it grass hockey, right? Or
field hockey.
Field hockey, yes.
Yeah,
so
but back home, we stuck to ice hockey.
And you never played field hockey. You're not famous in field hockey, right?
No, I don't think we're not
have
that
a team.
famous.
You're not even having a team.
But ice hockey, just want to say, when I say it's a religion, what I'm saying is that people follow it very, very closely. Every Saturday night, it's families get together and watch the ice hockey game, and it's a way to bring families together, talk about different things, and but we take it very, very seriously. But people will be very surprised to hear that the most popular sport in Canada at the moment, in terms of players, people participating in sports, is actually football, soccer.
Soccer, yes.
Yeah, football, soccer. And Canada's teams have become extremely good over the years. So I'll give you an example. So we didn't do so well at the Women's World Cup, and kudos to Spain for winning the cup.
Yes.
But Canada's women's team, national women's team, are still the Olympic champions, the reigning Olympic champions. And the men's national team was at the World Cup in Qatar. And we have a gentleman who plays for the Canada team, Alphonso Davies, who's plays for Bayern in Munich in Germany. And we're very proud of him because he's a refugee to Canada and has grown in Edmonton, has grown up in Edmonton, is now, a superstar, a world superstar. So we're very proud of that. And I think the fact that, we have many different nationalities contributing to the society in Canada makes for a very interesting prospect for Canadian soccer, Canadian football.
Since we are in sports, then we have to go to arts and theater.
Yes.
So we definitely have seen, and maybe people do not notice that, how it is very becoming a very sort of important backbone of the movie industry in the United States of America is the cinema industry, which is thriving in Canada. And a lot of American movies are even filmed in Canada in studios and becoming so popular. And sometimes people don't really find difference in the movie, and they cannot tell except by the subtitles at the end that this has been filmed in Canada. But I noticed that, and I can see that a lot of films are made. Maybe the famous Montreal film festival is not as famous as other, or Ottawa film festivals are not as famous as the other films, but festivals. But yet you are producing a lot of soap operas, a lot of short series, miniseries, and films. Tell us about this interesting, thriving industry.
No, it's a very, very, very important industry in Canada. I would say the three main centers are located in the three main cities in Canada. In Montreal, we have studios who are producing many, many different American movies. Toronto as well. Toronto is known as being the New York City in film. So if you see a movie or TV show
that is food for thought, that's more experimental and going on this side.
Exactly. So it's happening in New York City. Most likely it will have been filmed in Toronto. So the famous British actor Peter Ustinov used to say that Toronto is New York City run by the Swiss. Now, a very proper city, everything works, everything is clean.
Well, for a guy who's so egocentric, who has written his biography and say, "Dear me," then this is the guy, to get from him an opinion. Peter Ustinov, definitely.
That's right. And in Vancouver, we have a very vibrant movie scene in Vancouver, and we have famous actors coming from Canada. For example, Ryan Reynolds is a good Canadian. There's also Ryan Gosling, who's also a good Canadian, and we have a number of different actors and actresses.
But do they sometimes go to LA and stay there in the Hollywood?
They do,
but they keep Canada in their hearts.
Very much so. If you look at, for example, Ryan Reynolds, every time he goes on social media, you know, he have the soft spot for Canada.
No, everybody has it. You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think definitely it's very important to attract the attention of our listeners to the fact that Canada is, if we may use the second capital of cinema industry, is in Canada, second to the United States. This might be more interesting because it's even more advanced than one that is found in the UK or in Europe, because the number of, as regards the number, as you said, the movies and of the soap operas and of this mini-series, all that you can find a trace of them. Canadian heritage, right?
Yeah. You mentioned, if I may, Dr. Mabrouk, you mentioned film festivals. So we're looking at how to build connections between film festivals in Canada and also the El Gouna Film Festival here in Egypt. We're looking at maybe finding ways to promote Canadian cinema a bit more here in Egypt. So stay tuned, listeners. You might be hearing some very interesting news and things in the coming future.
Thank you for bringing the subject of cooperation between Egypt, because this will be the subject of what our final part of our talk about Egyptian-Canadian relations. So stay tuned with us, our dear listeners, to His Excellency Ambassador Louis Dumas, Ambassador of Canada in Egypt, and we'll talk about Egyptian-Canadian relations just after the break. Well, we are listening to the World of Info, and it is really very interesting to talk about with His Excellency Ambassador Louis Dumas, Ambassador of Canada in Egypt, and definitely the Egyptian-Canadian relations. I know that they have very much improved during your tenure here in Egypt.
You're so kind.
And of course, we always attribute or give tribute also to your predecessors, because you come from a line of ambassadors who served in Egypt very well and always improved our relations between Canada and Egypt, even since Ambassador Norman. We always give tribute to him, because he did a very good job back in 1956 during the tripartite aggression on Egypt. Canada has taken a very firm position, whether this was through the Secretary of State or the Foreign Service, Mr. Pearson at that time, or with the aid and help of his experienced ambassador, Ambassador Norman, who unfortunately passed away in a dreadful accident or incident here in Egypt. And Pearson himself got nominated to become the Nobel laureate because of his decision or his help to have the Blue Berets to separate between the Egyptian and the Israeli forces in Sinai. So, following the footsteps of great ambassadors and great statesmen like Pearson and Ambassador Norman, tell us about. First of all, I really admired the meeting that you had, talking about the policy of repatriation of antiquities, because Canada has a very strict policy that any illegally acquired artifact or antiquity that belongs to any heritage will be definitely, after proof that it is illegally present in Canada, will be shipped back to its mother country. And this you have done with the aid of both of you, the Canadian ambassador in Cairo and the Egyptian ambassador in Canada. Tell us about this particular policy, because it gives a lot of due respect to that.
No, the protection of cultural property and cultural rights is extremely important to us. So we've signed an agreement with UNESCO with a number of countries that we recognize the importance of preserving the cultural property to its rightful owner. So we do work very, very closely, as you pointed out, Dr. Mabrouk, with the Egyptian government. We know for a fact that a lot of artifacts have left Egypt, and I would even dare to say still leaving Egypt. And it's not because of governments not trying to put together efforts to stop that. It's just people who will, forget about the rules and will still enter the black market and do that type of trade. So when goods, for example, enter Canada at the border, be it people carrying goods into Canada or sending goods via mail to Canada, we apply a very strict policy in respect to artifacts. So we have intercepted artifacts in the past. We have returned artifacts to Egypt and other countries, and I think we owe it to ourselves, to be very respectful of the rightful owner of those artifacts. I think you are alluding to a get together we had at the Canadian residence a few weeks ago, by which we asked a young lady who's an expert in this field to come in and talk to us about the reality of the illicit trade in artifacts. And it was very enlightening, because a lot of people are, I would say, confused about the different laws, the different agreements, the different reality in the history of Egypt. But we wanted to bring people together so they can have a better understanding of the parameters, and then come up with their strategy to again be mindful of property rights and cultural rights of countries to retain their artifacts.
So definitely this is very interesting, because the Egyptian-Canadian relations are not just in the field of antiquities, but it also has a lot of perspectives. Definitely the economic cooperation, we have to stress about the economic cooperation. I know that there is a board of the Canadian-Egyptian businessmen who are trying to get together in improving the cooperation in the field of economy. Tell us about these activities, if you mind.
I think it's one of my jobs, one of the hats I have to wear is trade cooperation, and we try very, very hard at bringing more trade into between Canada and Egypt. We've managed to do so to a fair degree over the past few years. However, I find that our trade is very much along two avenues. One of which is from Canada to Egypt. Egypt is importing a lot of food stuff from Canada, which is really good. Fava beans, chickpeas, lentils. I mean, a fair percentage of those products available here in Egypt actually come from Canada. And from Egypt to Canada, we import in Canada gold from Egypt. 90% of the exports from Egypt to Canada is actually gold. So, but what I'd like to see is have a more diversified type of trade between the two countries. And that's why over the past few weeks, we've done some great work, with the government of Egypt to bring Canadian companies in the mining sector to come and have an interest in exploring.
Come and dig for themselves, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And we know that Canada has one of the best expertise in the mining sector, with companies like Barrick Gold, for example. So Barrick Gold will be coming more and more to Egypt, assist the government of Egypt in a very respectful manner, in a very, I would say, environmental friendly manner to go and explore the subterranean of Egypt.
Especially the eastern desert of Egypt has a lot of potential for gold,
absolutely,
which has been used by the ancient Egyptians. And I remember, since my mother was geologist, she used to tell me that in the 60s and before the 60s, the gold mining perspective was not that much, because the gold was not that expensive at that time, so it was not economic to invest in the mining business in the eastern desert. But now, with the rising prices of gold that are raising astronomical figures, we can find that it's becoming very wise to invest in these mines and start opening up and digging in them to get more benefit for both parties, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that we try to do with the companies is talk to them about the importance of integrating the communities into their work.
Yes.
So if I may use the as an example, there's a Canadian company close to Damietta on the north coast that is doing very well with working with in the local economy with Egyptians engineers, but they're doing as well programs, for society around Damietta. So, for example, they've created an entrepreneurship program with the governor of Damietta, by which a number of individuals have received training to start their business, and it has been extremely successful. They're investing in schools. So what I'm saying to Canadian companies coming to Egypt is that don't just look at profit.
Yes.
It has to be a win-win situation.
Exactly.
A win for Canada, but as well, it has to be a win for Egypt. Because if we make Egypt prosper, it means more business for Canada, more business for those companies.
I know that, yes.
So that's very important to me.
I know also that there is a sort of a very friendly relation between Prime Minister Trudeau and President Sisi, and there are a lot of cooperation, especially in the field of environment, that was very apparent in the COP27 when they both met, and of course a lot of people got involved in the prospects of protection of our environment. Tell us about this sort of friendly cooperation between the two leaders, how far it is going and how much is the chemistry in between them.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important that we engage at the highest level at the same time. So Prime Minister Trudeau is very, very sensitive to the question of environment. I have to say that currently we have an amazing environment minister in Canada, a fellow by the name of Stephen Guilbeault. I had the pleasure and honor of being with Mr. Guilbeault for almost 3 weeks in Sharm el-Sheikh in November of 2022. And it's something that's very, very close to our hearts. As recent, I think, as we speak, Minister Fouad, the Egyptian Minister of Environment, is in Vancouver to talk about environmental issues with the Canadian government and other governments at a conference. And it's something that we work very, very closely with the Egyptian government. I think, it's a long game, to be very frank with you. I think, there's challenges, but I see great progress in the relationship that we have. I just want to, make a plug for a company called Plastic Bank that helps, people in impoverished sectors of Egypt to collect plastic bottles and to redeem those plastic bottles against money. So it means less plastic in the Nile, in the streams, in the fields, and people can go and recycle that plastic. So Plastic Bank is working actively. So there's a lot of undercurrents that we're not aware of. But, let me assure you that the cooperation between Canada and Egypt in the environmental sector is second to none.
Definitely. So politically also, I think Canada has a lot of moderate views as regards the Middle East, as regards Egypt and the cooperation of fields. We have a lot of common points of view together, and I think this will definitely help very much to improve the situation of the whole world and the peace of the whole world.
Yeah.
Well, Excellency, I think we are running unfortunately out of time, but definitely we hope that we have another meeting.
Inshallah.
Yes, because not only the Egyptian-Canadian relations are going better by the day, but also the role of the Egyptian community. We have to go in depth and talk about the Egyptians Egyptian Canadians in Canada and how they are faring as a very successful group or community over there. And definitely you have to come again.
Avec plaisir, avec great pleasure.
Yes, I mean, it's really great honor for us and to have with us His Excellency Ambassador Louis Dumas, the Ambassador of Canada to Egypt. And by the way, definitely His Excellency, I will tell a secret, he understands very good Arabic, but he doesn't want to talk with Arabic, but he speaks just not only English, but I guess, of course, French, and a bit Chinese or a bit Russian? Or
Russian, по-русски.
Well, Excellency, great pleasure and honor. And my name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk. Manel Zakaria was on our team today, and we are very proud to have had His Excellency Ambassador Louis Dumas. Stay tuned to Radio Cairo with us, and we are hoping that next we'll meet you same day, same time, same station in Radio Cairo.